everyone, and welcome to the Future of Esports Virtual Roundtable. Thank you for joining Foley and Lardner for today's presentation. Before we get started on today's program, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Upon entering this meeting, if you are not speaking, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. If you have a question for our presenters, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon located in the toolbar on the top right-hand side of your screen, or you can enter your questions into the meeting chat. Questions will be addressed throughout the presentation. You may pin our speakers if you would like to see their videos for the duration of the webinar by clicking the three dots next to their name once their videos appear. If you experience any technical difficulties, please refresh your browser or leave the meeting and rejoin. If you continue to have issues, please email videoconferencing@foley.com. This presentation is being recorded. And now I will turn it over to Bobby Sharma, advisor to Foley Sports and Entertainment Group and moderator of today's program to begin. Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I think we have a really strong turnout, approaching 200 people have registered, so thank you so much for being a part of this today. We're going to start the content today with a little overview of the 4th annual esports market report, market survey that Foley and Lardner conducted. My colleagues at Foley conducted along with the Esports Observer and the Sports Business Journal. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John Israel to start us off.
Thank you, Bobby. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I am John Israel. I'm a partner in Foley and Lardner's New York City office, one of 22 Foley offices across the US, 25 globally. We have about 1,200 attorneys practicing in a broad range of disciplines that you would expect to find in a general service law firm of our size. The firm's distinguished itself in many ways, including around client service, and you can get more info on the firm itself at our website, foley.com. Now, along with Kevin Schulz, I am co-chair of the firm's Sports and Entertainment Group. And we are building something here that is really, truly unique in the sports law space. We're a multidisciplinary team of attorneys with significant experience in the sports and entertainment industry, which includes 6 attorneys who have held high-profile positions at leading sports organizations, including within the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and golf. In fact, each of the Foley attorneys you're going to hear from today have such in-house experience. I spent 8 years at the National Basketball Association where I worked with Bobby. You're also going to hear from Michael Wall, who's in our Boston office and was previously the general counsel of the Boston Bruins. You're also going to hear from Andy Lee, who's in our New York office and was at one time the general counsel of the New York Jets. So with this in-house background, we really help clients solve problems from a place of experiential understanding. We've been in their chairs. We understand the pressures that they face and what they really need from their outside lawyers. And our work runs the gamut from team sales and acquisitions, capital raising, investment, fund creation, sports facility development and creation, and operations, media and broadcasting, naming rights, corporate sponsorships, intellectual property of all kinds, trademarks, patents, etc., and a host of other legal matters, labor and employment, antitrust, league governments, you name it, we do it. And several years ago, and now maybe it's more than just several years ago, our long history of work in traditional sports led us to esports and video gaming. And we just started to see more and more work in the space, including work on streaming platforms, player contracts, influencer agreements, investment deals, sponsorship agreements. It just kept growing and growing. And And there was, clearly growth and increasing attention at that time. There were significant investors coming into the space from traditional sports. And as industry and businesses grow, so do their legal issues, both in number and magnitude. And we just saw a screaming need for more sophisticated legal services supporting the industry. And we went from there. And where did we go? One of the best things we did was team up with the Esports Observer to do our first survey of industry stakeholders. We wanted to know what legal issues were keeping industry insiders up at night, whether they were seeing some of the same things that we were seeing. And ultimately, the goal was to be a resource to help others stay in tune with key legal developments, which, if not managed, could decimate or derail a nascent or growing business. Now, 4 years later, we've published our 4th annual survey report. We're so grateful for our ongoing partnership with the Esports Observer and now the Sports Business Journal. They bring their keen industry insight to our survey questions and help us reach a broader audience of survey participants and readers. We look forward to continuing our annual collaboration with the Esports Observer and the Sports Business Journal, and helping all of us stay on top of industry trends and issues. So today, there's so much to consider: the impact of the pandemic, the advent of crypto, NFTs, blockchain, the lure of online betting, the large-scale, eye-popping acquisitions we've recently seen, and not to mention the long-standing cultural problems that continue to plague the industry with, on the legal front. So let's get into it. What has our 4th annual survey revealed? Our Foley team today is going to quickly review the survey results and trends, as Bobby indicated, and then we're going to hear from our really incredible roundtable panel of guests who will share their insights and the latest and greatest and help us assess the future of esports and video gaming. So with that, just want to thank you again for making the time to join us. And without further ado, let's get on with the show. And I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Michael Wall, who's going to start us at least on an overview of the survey results. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm going to take a few minutes just to review with you some of what I think are the key takeaways from this year's survey report. I'll review 5 charts with you to guide us through that. If each of these charts is found in the survey report, so if I go too fast, you can find them there. But this first chart shows the remarkable bullishness the respondents have with respect to the near-term prospects for growth in the esports industry. 88% of the respondents expect investment and deal activity to increase in the first half of 2022, and only 4% of respondents expect a decrease. 0 expect a significant decrease. This bullishness and this continued growth seems to be fueled by the continuing increase in esports viewership, the continuing growth in online streaming platforms like Twitch and YouTube gaming, and the crossover integration of video gaming with other forms of entertainment. What's interesting, in each of the 4 years of this survey, the optimistic outlook of the respondents has increased each year. What can we expect to be driving this investment growth, at least in 2022? Well, in each of the 3 prior surveys, respondents expected that traditional professional sports teams and leagues and athletes and celebrities would be the primary driver of investment growth and deal activity, with private equity and venture capital firms coming in second. For the first time this year, esports dedicated investment funds has launched to the top spot with a 21% increase over last year. So, what can we take away from the drop by traditional pro sports teams and leagues? We can speculate, but I think it's realistic to say that the initial rush among traditional sports stakeholders to seize some territory in the esports ecosystem may be over and won't resume until revenue growth increases substantially. That may be one reason. Another is that traditional sports owners may have underestimated the difference between their traditional business models and esports, and how difficult revenue growth and monetization would be to achieve. But finally, the drop this year may just be temporary. It could represent the fact that traditional sports owners have faced an existential threat to their sports assets with the pandemic, and they were necessarily distracted to repairing the damage caused by the pandemic, distracted away from a focus on esports. Finally, internet and technology companies in each of the last 4 surveys have pulled up in the rear and seen as least impactful on investment growth. But this may be evidence that these respondents, like the rest of us, may be surprised by the recent deals Microsoft and Sony have gotten involved in. What's driving the revenue growth in the industry for each of the 4 years, it has been advertising and sponsorships. It has been seen as the biggest drivers of growth. This year, events and competition jumped to number 2, and that's likely due to the fact or the expectation that more in-person events will take place as pandemic restrictions decrease. I haven't put up a chart on this, but respondents see significant growing opportunities for growth in esports, in the esports betting market. With traditional sports venues closed during the pandemic, the appetite for esports betting grew among those who like to bet and who couldn't on traditional sports at the time. And the appetite has also grown among the regulators in Nevada and other states who jump-started bills for legalizing esports betting. The expectation of growth is also driven by increased esports viewership, which is evident, and also the growing dominance of cryptocurrency in the economy. Cryptocurrency has had a natural kinship with esports enthusiasts since the very beginning. Now, this chart, however, shows the threats to the potential growth in esports betting. Number 1 is the lack of adequate detection systems and monitoring tools. That has been the primary concern in the last 2 years. And this year, the lack of oversight from a governing body has taken the second spot. Dropping most significantly from 45% to 22% is the general public's lack of esports knowledge when betting. And this seems to speak to the growing awareness of esports and sophistication of the esports audience. I'll ask John Israel to speak to the legal challenges in general that confront esports. John?
I'm happy to do that, Michael. I don't know if we had the slide that addressed the percentages that we saw of the respondents. It may not be in here. One of the things that I'd ask too is if we can get a link up to the survey report in the chat box. We're going to try to do that too for those who haven't been able to download it, because it is available on Foley.com, and hopefully we can get a link for you in the chat box here. But one of the things one of the things I love about this survey is that we get to see, we've seen it over the last 4 years, is just development of trends and issues. And over the years, we've seen various legal issues sort of stay in the mix, right? employment issues, harassment, and things like that. And this year we had a sort of keener focus on intellectual property rights and licensing. And while in looking at the results themselves, I didn't really see a true leader on the list of various legal concerns. It just seemed to me there's a bunch of different key issues that the industry stakeholders are having to juggle with, and cybersecurity and data privacy was one of those, which is a given, and I think it's something that the industry's been dealing with for its life cycle here. But the IP and licensing issues were at notable levels in terms of percentage results of people focusing on them, and that was something a little bit different than we had seen in the past. And I'm getting a lot of questions about it. And we're, trying to noodle over it and figure out what that really is saying. And I think maybe it's just stakeholders recognizing that it's becoming really ever more critical to secure and advance their rights and interests around intellectual property, media rights, and digital assets. I mean, these are foundational to the development of any business, particularly those in the natively digital world of esports and gaming. So I guess in some ways it wasn't surprising, even though it was new. And I think this goes hand in hand with the increased reliance on sponsorship and licensing that is driving revenue, including from commercial interests that are outside the industry. I just saw today that Yves Saint Laurent was sponsoring League of Legends in China, and these are great developments, big name brands, and these transactions are becoming more complex with more stakeholders and more at stake with respect to securing and allocating IP rights. So I think there's likely to be more of a focus on this now, at least people, thinking hard about how they're protecting and enforcing their IP rights. Beyond this, the labor and employment issues continue to be part of concern. And as a labor and employment attorney, I can't ignore the longstanding issues, whether it's, sex and other discrimination in toxic workplaces and online environments, as well as, the complicated legal and contractual landscape of engaging talent, whether as employees or otherwise. These are things that seem to sort of be dogging the industry for any number of years now, and it seems that every year there's a round of Me Too or other revelations that burst into public view around esports and gaming. And these issues are sometimes viewed as tail wagging the dog problems for businesses that are trying to get up and running, but for stakeholders who really want to reach mainstream commercial sponsors and audiences, these are things that are just going to have to be wrestled to the ground and addressed. And this goes for all the participants who are in this space, whether it's leagues, game developers, streaming platforms as well. So that's a bit of an overview on the legal. Michael, I don't know where we're going next, but maybe it's NFTs and Andy.
Yeah, you mentioned digital assets, John, and obviously NFTs were not on the survey radar last year, nor really on anyone's radar, I assume. But the respondents in this year's survey, 79% of them believe that NFTs will maintain a prominent role this year and in the future. And Andy Lee will discuss that area.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say, the way this space is moving, right? The survey was done, at this point several months ago. I would think if the survey was done today, the results would actually be different and showing a higher, confidence in the implications and the emergence of NFTs in the space. As it stands, the survey does, reflect that attitudes about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, in this space are growing. Most people do expect them to the presence of NFTs in the space to grow this year. The top result of what people suggested, where they thought it would be relevant, would be with respect to digital player cards being a leading option. Skins, animations, avatars, and things like that were came in second. I do believe we're going to see lots of, there's probably ways even throughout the course of this year, of innovations that will come into play that we haven't even thought of, and that wouldn't even have occurred to anyone on the survey. We do know, as of right now, just by way of data, right, there are already, as of last month, right, so for the period ending the 30-day period ending January 10th, there were 14 different NFT-based games that had more than 100,000 users during just a 30-day period. And that's a big deal. The top one was Alien Worlds, had more than 1 million, and Axie Infinity had close to 700,000 just during that 30-day period. So these are growing areas, and they're developing in ways that are creating sort of their own internal ecosystems. So digital player cards are obviously going to be important. They're in line with what we've seen in the general NFT space over the course of the last year in terms of collectibles. But a big part of what I think we're going to see in relative to esports and gaming is going to be play to earn functionality, which is already very big. I mentioned Axie Infinity, and there's going to be a lot of platforms where players are going to be generating their own actual value, either in terms of cryptocurrency or in-game tokens that can be cashed out. We've seen that trend in the Philippines, for example, over COVID, where a lot of people made a living playing games like Axie Infinity, and what that does is it tends to create this whole ecosystem, and it attracts investment, and that fosters innovation, and that's going to help to bring forth new opportunities for developers to take advantage of. There is right now a bit of a bottleneck in the play to earn world because there's not a ton of assets, and therefore they're very expensive. You have to own a particular NFT to participate, but we are seeing situations where those NFTs can be rented out so people can play and earn without actually having to invest in the NFT, and that's part of the broader ecosystem that I think is going to develop in this space, and also the NFT world in general. And this is going to translate into esports, I believe. There's a power of community in these projects, these NFT projects, and we're going to see. I think we'll see that happen in the gaming side as well, where guilds will come together for players to build communities and talk about things and share thoughts about the competition and games as well. I do think over the course of this in the coming years, we will see development in the area of sort of cross-chain bridges, so connecting different blockchains. So you're going to have it probably will have situations where assets from one game might end up, living in or being traded or usable in another game, and all of that is part of this sort of user-centric, decentralized world that is developing and creating real value for the end users. That is more than just the winning an event or having a high score or something like that, but real world value. These games are becoming, and I think will be in the Web3 world, the new social platform. So when you think about Fortnite, which started as a first-person battle royale game, now Fortnite is its own universe where they have virtual concerts for millions of users, dedicated spaces for players to hang out with each other. So it's become much more than just the game, and that leads to commercial opportunities as well, because when you have concerts, you have sponsorships, and you have the ability to sell things to people, and all of that is going to develop in the metaverse, which is very growing, a buzzword of growing popularity right now, but it's a natural fit for esports and gaming because of everything I just described, of the example of Fortnite. So places like the Sandbox, CryptoVoxels, Decentraland are going to lead to not only a shift of users' attention and players, the worlds they get to operate in, but also a shift in consumer spending, right, to more online in-world spending, and that creates opportunities within games. There are 29 different social platforms that have at least 100 million active users right now. In the Web 2 world, that's mostly centralized platforms like Facebook and Instagram. what we're seeing in the development of blockchain and the NFT space in the Web3 world is going to yield the opportunity for these decentralized platforms to take over. So, in the past, your social currency on Instagram, if you have millions of Instagram followers, right, that's real value and worth something. In this new world, your social currency or your digital cryptocurrency that you may be able to earn by playing these games is gonna sort of bleed into, and I think eventually take over a lot of that space. We could see. I saw yesterday there was an example, a good example of this, where the Braves announced the creation of Digital Park Trust, which is basically a virtual metaverse version of their stadium or parts of it, complete with users getting to have avatars and play games and win prizes, have social spaces and sponsorship opportunities. So all of that is gonna converge. And finally, as I said earlier, as all these things are happening, we're seeing a tremendous amount of capital being deployed into this space. And that's really significant, because the more capital is deployed, like I said, the more that drives innovation, and the more we're going to see new opportunities and new technologies and new ways that esports can infiltrate and saturate this space in ways that will really have a dramatic impact over the next several years.
Well, great.
Thank you, Andy. It's all getting very simple, isn't it? I'm going to turn this over to Bobby now, so we can continue with the roundtable discussion.
Great. So now we could turn to esports, what we all came for today. I will make a point that in preparing for this today with the roundtable, which is an amazing one, as you can see on your screens, the guys were quick to point out that the metaverse is a dangerous rabbit hole to go down. So we'll probably avoid that today. But that's a whole nother roundtable we could probably do very soon. But yeah, the survey's great. Links have been posted to it. If you haven't read it, I urge you to. It's fascinating to me to see and to keep the perspective that it's really a read on the market. So it's not the actual market, it's the perceptions of the market. And because esports is so young and really unstable, perceptions can drive reality. So towards that end, it's fascinating. And I think also it's really fascinating to see how sophisticated the market for esports has become, and its recognition that whether it's the points that Mike made about investment being increasingly driven towards people who are domain experts as opposed to traditional sports leagues and teams, or even institutional capital. The rise of NFTs that Andy spoke about, and even a subtle point that there's that recognition that media rights are not, in the immediate term, going to be a value driver, and that's something that we'll get to. But when we made the decision to do this panel, it was on the back of putting that survey out there, and it really felt like the industry was at an inflection point. And I thought it would be a great idea to gather some distinguished folks like we have here today, which I'll introduce in a moment. But obviously a lot has gone on in the time between our deciding to do this in December, January, and today on February 17th, and including some massive M&A deals that will drive the future of everything esports. But we have here today Chris Hanna, who's a VP of Business Development from Epic's Digital Collectibles, which I think actually is having a rebrand, which Chris can mention if he likes. But you all might know Chris Hanna as the founder of the Esports Observer, or partner on that survey. We've got Craig Levine, whose name you might have read in the paper as part of one of those massive M&A deals, who is the co-CEO of ESL. We've got Chris Greeley, who is head of esports for North America and Oceania for a little company called Riot Games. As I'm sure many of you know, probably the biggest esports company in the planet. And Rishi Chadha from another startup called Twitter, who's head of gaming and content partnerships. And Martin Gibbs, who's the CEO of Belong Gaming, which is a fascinating component of Vindex, which is its parent company, that has rolled up some really strong assets in the esports production space, both on the events and media side. So welcome to all of our panelists. And I'm going to kick it off with, in the interest of efficiency, I'm going to kick it off with a question on that M&A activity I talked about. So as we're all well aware, there's been some massive deals by any standard, by any industry standard, in the very recent past, front page news, including Microsoft's $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard, which is something almost inconceivable to people in the space, considering that Activision Blizzard was, one of the biggest companies in the entire gaming industry, if not the biggest, behind Tencent, I should probably say, and / Riot. And also we saw the week prior, the biggest deal in the history of M&A deal in the history of esports was Take-Two's deal for Zynga at $11 billion. And I think subsequent, we saw Sony do a quick strategic deal for Bungie for a little under $4 billion. So what's going on here? What does all this mean? What's the strategy behind these things? I'm going to start with Chris Greeley, part of the biggest company in esports, Tencent and Riot.
I'm waiting for my buyout. I think it's funny. A couple of months ago when we talked about consolidation, we were all focused on esports teams consolidating, and we saw a lot of that as ownership groups came together to try to find synergies to push themselves towards a cash flow revenue positive state, right? Like, we've got a great content team, you've got a great operations team. Let's take the best brand, put the teams together, and move forward and try to engage fans the best way we can. From my perspective, no inside information on any of these deals or sort of how they came about, but they very much struck me personally as opportunistic. I think it was a great opportunity for some of those, for Microsoft and Sony specifically to come in and kind of scoop up some really valuable IP and some really valuable properties. When you look at the synergies that they can create, I don't think for them it's just about gaming and being able to talk to the audiences. But when you look at Activision Blizzard, right, all the IP that sits in there. We had the World of Warcraft movie that is maybe not worth a mention here, but there's a lot of great stories and IP that come out of the World of Warcraft world that I think they can do incredible things with down the line and in the future with Microsoft, who's shown that they have ambitions outside of just gaming. I think the biggest change it'll drive is as we look at, like, generally as the number of parties get smaller. Like, I don't want to talk too much about my friends at ESL and Face It. It certainly makes my RFP list much shorter when we want to go talk to folks. But there are opportunities there when you look at those kind of mergers to find synergies, to combine client lists, to really strengthen the things that those companies already do well. And like, in some respects, I think that's what you look for as an industry starts to grow up, or those cycles where you have lots of folks who come in and build a business for a few years, and then there's consolidation, and then hopefully another round of new folks coming in to sort of challenge those incumbents. And that I think is what's going to continue to drive growth and development in our sector.
And ESL and Face It, of course, having come together under Savvy Gaming for under a $1.5 billion deal, which is what Chris is alluding to. So Craig is a part as co-CEO of ESL, which for those in the audience that aren't aware, is the biggest and oldest organizer of events, and I probably had a hard time. And Craig could give us a background on that through the last couple of years through COVID. But Craig, what are your thoughts on this consolidation? What does it mean for companies like yours, and what happens next?
Yeah, I think across the board, when you look at the mega deals of the industry that you're alluding to, Bobby, it's right, the emerging trends of the sector, right? Things like cross-platform play that are bringing together Zynga and Take-Two. Things with Activision and Microsoft, obviously opportunistic, as I agree, as Chris described, but also, right, the bigger trend towards sort of these lifestyle subscriptions, what Netflix's aspirations and ambitions are in gaming that they've already done in movies. So I think, you're seeing a lot of those trends sort of being, aggregating, let's say, around sort of the big techs. I think that's what's driving a lot of the consolidation. And then more specifically within esports, on the ESL and Face It side, I mean, for us, it's funny how these things get timed, right? Everyone knows how long they get worked on, and the fact they all sort of came out in this rapid fire succession. Everyone probably chuckled a little bit and glad we didn't have the same wedding date circled in our calendars. But for us, it's, when you look at this now, it's an industry of giants that are getting bigger. And for us as an independent esports company, being able to stand taller with a complementary business like Face It allows us to extract more value from what we're creating. And that's what brought us together with Face It, is this idea that by extracting more value, by delivering more value, we can create more sustainability. And I think that's a trend that you're going to continue to see, as Chris was also describing some of the subsectors amongst teams and others. So, I think you're going to see it continue, and this is probably just the beginning of that phase that you were describing. Great.
I'm not sure if it's my technical issue, but your camera is not visible. But if everyone else can see you, terrific. So that's a great insight with respect to the subscription driving that is probably driving a lot of the strategy behind Microsoft's acquisition there. So I'm going to turn this question to or more media-centric folks or press-centric folks, or if that's the right word, with Chris and Rishi. What happens? Let's play the speculation game. What's next? What are the big targets out there? Obviously, Valve is the white whale in terms of an enormously important and influential company, privately held in the space, in the esports space in particular. But there are other big publishers out there. For companies like that have dabbled in the esports space, like Netflix and Facebook, or the ones that are deeply engaged already, like Google, owning VOD basically in the space with YouTube, and of course Amazon owning the live platform and Twitch. What makes sense? Are you hearing anything out there? What drives that strategy going forward? Because there's a very short list of companies that could do M&A at this scale. I'll start with Chris. Hannah.
All right. So I'm going to answer the question, but I got to take a little detour. First of all, I want to throw all the praise back for the survey, because we at TEO and SPJ also like doing these with you. So thanks for that. I think it's great that all this stuff happens now, because for the recent years, if I went on presentations, my last slide always said, like, so what are we going to see? We're going to see market consolidation. And it never happened. And people were looking at me like, so when? And I'm like, yeah, next year. Next year is the year. And now all of a sudden, it's like, Craig said, it all happens at once. So my first initial thought was, who's going to buy EA? That was just immediately came to mind. And, I was Sony going to buy them. And then, they made a different move. I mean, let's see. What's interesting, though, is if you look at the size, and at TEO, we tracked investments. And when we go back into 2020, Q4, we saw around like 8 billion invested in the space per quarter. We had the same in, Q2 2020. So that was like huge amounts. And then all of a sudden, like Q1 21 happened, and we saw like 25 billion being invested, also across, publishers and major acquisitions. And you just mentioned some of the numbers that we saw this year. So all of a sudden, if you put that on the chart, like everything, pre this year is just disappearing, because we see this huge amounts of money being invested. I mean, I don't think Valve is going to sell. Probably Valve is going to buy stuff rather than being sold. I'm really curious to see who's going to snatch what, but it's what you said, right? So you look at Amazon, you look at probably Netflix making moves. You look at, there is only a couple of really big companies that have the purchasing power to go after stuff. So you see Mixer didn't work out, right? So Mixer was a nice try by Microsoft. Hey, let's get into the market. Didn't work. Now a different approach. Let's just buy a publisher, another one, and integrate that. And I think it all makes sense, right? But I just don't think that there's too many companies that have the power to just go after these, big whales right now. So I think it's going to be the same companies, that fight over everything in the world, and now they look at gaming, and they're just getting involved with that.
Right. That's why I think it's actually a productive speculation conversation, because there aren't that many deals to be done. It's really just about connecting the dots with the ones that are out there, and that there's more to come. Rishi, what are your thoughts on all this?
A lot of what Chris is saying, I feel the same. I think also what's going to be interesting is seeing how Netflix and also Apple build out their gaming offerings and see what they do with that. Like obviously Apple Arcade's done incredibly well, but it's not the traditional type of gaming we think about with console or PC. And so, how does that continue to evolve and what becomes of that? The same with Netflix. They've got incredibly valuable IP that they already own. And so thinking about what they do with that IP and how they turn that into games and what type of games they make with that and who they partner with is going to be very interesting to see. They've come out with their own claims that they're going to have the best games as a service model in the space to rival something like Xbox Game Pass, which is already doing incredibly well. So I think before people start to acquire, they're going to try and build their own offerings first, specifically Netflix and Apple, and build on that. And then see if it doesn't work, then it might be time to start acquiring some studios from there. So we didn't talk about it, but Ubisoft's another one that's out there. That's definitely something to consider for an acquisition, especially where it currently is right now. So I think there's still a few more out there, but the one that probably is most readily available would be Ubisoft, in my opinion, and then probably EA after that.
So I'm gonna jump around a little bit. In full disclosure to the audience, with the panel, we kind of went through some topics and came up with the flow, but I'm gonna mix up the flow. Mobile. To what extent do you think mobile drew? I saw a really interesting stat, but back to the Microsoft deal. So King, which makes Candy Crush, as we all know, as a part of Activision Blizzard, in the third quarter last year drove 245 million monthly active users versus Activision itself at 119 and Blizzard at 26 million. So obviously that's a driving force here. Game Pass and subs and subscriptions and driving that is obviously a key part of the strategy. But mobile has to be, which is really interesting for a company like Microsoft. But let's talk about that. And I'd be really curious, especially from Craig's perspective, running an events company. What is the present and future of mobile gaming for esports, right? Which we define as professional competitive gaming, right? Like I think a lot of people get, okay, there's a lot of money in Candy Crush, but people get, okay, people will pay, and a lot of people at scale, to the tune of tens of millions or hundreds of millions will watch people play League of Legends or CSGO. But is there a future for mobile gaming? How does this play? Is this more of a gaming industry play as opposed to an esports play? We'll start with Craig on the event side. Like, what's the present? Because a lot of people won't know of mobile gaming on an esports level, and what's the future and the impact of all this?
Yeah, when you think about the answer, it's early and it's the beginning, but it's happening. When you think about what esports is, it's about watching the best, compete, the best play at scale with that. And for that, you need rich experiences. And certainly, historically, that's evolved in the gaming industry out of the PC first ecosystem, which is always very open and very innovative. And you're seeing that now on the mobile front, right, with things like 5G, faster handsets, bigger screens. You're now seeing out of that technology, you're now seeing richer gameplay experiences that, oh, by the way, are also more social. And those are the seeds that you've always needed to create sort of that community around it and that experience that esports is really built on. So the answer is mobile, in my opinion, is where PC esports was probably, call it 10 years ago on a global scale, but you are already seeing undisputably in markets like India and China and Southeast Asia and Brazil, where the penetration of handset devices is higher, where there's less access to more high-end equipment. You're already seeing in those parts of the world that arenas are filling up with people watching other people play, that these events and competitions are drawing some of the largest viewership in the world. So it's happening. And it's only going to start accelerating from here. I know on the ESL side, we created a product, ESL Mobile, a few years ago to start to incubate some of these ideas under what we call an umbrella property, much like we did with Intel Extreme Masters 20 plus years ago. And that over time, those games will splinter out into their own game ecosystems, much like how League of Legends has done, over that period. So you'll see more from us coming out on this, hopefully in the next couple of days and weeks. That wasn't planned maybe with our panel here, but we're big believers in it, and it's happening.
Great. Any other thoughts from Chris Nana, Chris Greeley, Richie?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is we're finally, one of the biggest challenges with mobile esports and just mobile games in general is it's not necessarily something that people want to consume content of. Like, people don't want to watch YouTube videos of someone playing mobile games. Like, that's been a challenge for a long time. We're finally starting to see a shift in that. And I think we're even seeing that on the conversation side where, we just put out our report for year end for 2021 on Twitter conversation. And one of the things we call out is the most talked about esports athletes. And now we finally have an esports athlete from Brazil who plays Garena Free Fire. So it speaks to there's penetration happening. We're finally hitting that point. I think it was like I was on a panel with Paul Brewer 3 years ago, and we said 3 years from now it might happen. We're getting close. We're almost there. I feel kind of like Chris saying that acquisitions are happening, but I think everybody on the panel is very much like, hey, mobile is very much a thing, and that we're now getting to a place where much more the experiences are much better, and they're going to be something that people want to consume in the future. So we're getting close.
Right. So mobile just adds another layer of complexity to the equation, but also growth, especially in emerging markets where consoles and especially consoles, and even PCs are not as prevalent. But there's a lot of fragmentation, right? Like, let's talk about where esports is, right? We've got hundreds of millions of people consuming it, literally hundreds of millions avid, right? About 500 million consuming it by some measures. Yet its value is still a fraction of any media product, much less traditional sports, as a comparison point. So something is awry with the models, right? As we see a lot of it due to instability, right? As everybody is sorting out what the leagues look like, what the events look like. On the event side, with this consolidation, what is the impact of that? We saw that Activision Blizzard was very heavily invested in a city-based traditional sports league model. Riot obviously wanted not with the city-based, with the decentralized approach, which is more in keeping with the culture of esports. Are we going to see things with a company like Microsoft that subscribes more to that than I would think than a city-based model, but generally has not subscribed to professional esports as a model? Are we going to see, as a result of this consolidation, a shift in how these things are, how the events are run and organized? I'll start with Martin. This question we haven't heard from Martin yet. With his company Vindex, I know it's not your sector, you're part of the company, but obviously 2/3 of your company or so is on the events and video production side for the events. So what's your take on how this plays out in terms of the events model? Does it get pulled back into the publishers? Does it get pushed out to third parties entirely? And what are the implications? Which is probably, there's a lot of people probably on this in the audience here, fascinated to hear the perspective on this too. What are the implications for those leagues?
Yeah, I think leagues and events go hand in hand, and you can't really delineate between the two. When you look at traditional sports, it's undoubted the fact that if you consolidate down, you grow your viewership, you grow your media value, you grow your fandom. So having an organised construct to that is exemplified at the big events, but is just the day-to-day running of those leagues is really what we're talking about. And underneath that, obviously, there's the grassroots piece that is even more fragmented at the moment because there's no real way to consolidate that as we see it. But I think there are billions of gamers, and they need a construct in which to operate, and that fandom, be I somebody that watches or play or both, needs to be constructed in a fashion that allows the industry to grow the monetization per person. It's always the word that no one likes, but it's how do we give the experiences that give more and more income, more and more excitement to every activity that we're looking to run, be it a publisher, an event organizer, somebody running like me, a 20-person LAN tonight in one arena up to the 10,000 arenas. So we need a properly constructed infrastructure. We need to be collaborating on the resources that we need. And I think the way in which we're starting to see some of that consolidation will undoubtedly support that. I think there is a general move towards that construct, which will mean the fragmentation will become less. That will never happen as quick as any of us would like, because it started from such a fragmented space in the first place. Whereas most sports started, grassroots and built up. Esports are sort of is trying to do the inverse pyramid, which is always difficult, because you're going to a smaller amount to start with, and then trying to get everybody, if you like, sucked into that. But I think that publishers are going to continue to either want to own every part of that value chain, or they're going to want to partner with those that are experts in certain fields. So I think publishers will ultimately want to control their franchises and their IPs, their gaming experiences. And I think publishers will want to outsource some or all of their esport operations to qualified third parties to be able to give that part of the experience. And it really is what part of that value chain publishers want to own, and what do they want to be famous for. And as I say, I think some of the consolidation will undoubtedly help that.
Yeah, I think you hit two things there, Bobby, right? One is the idea of monetization, and we always say that revenue lags relevance, and certainly there's been no shortage of fandom of what esports is and what video gaming is, but it's also at the bleeding edge of technology and disrupting and breaking a lot of established business models that have made the traditional sports league so rich on it, right? So things like media rights, as you described earlier, it's not because people don't care about our content. We've all seen the stats that more Gen Z care about esports than traditional sports like the NHL or Major League Baseball. But it's, in a world where there's no rights fees on RSFNs and there's free distribution on great platforms, and premium content struggles to monetize in digital formats, how do you create value, and how do you change business models? And that's where things like NFTs, I think, are inevitably going to intersect in a complementary way to esports, and probably lead the development into other sports. And then, as Martin was describing, right, it's then how does a publisher, what's the role of third parties on that infrastructure level of that ecosystem? And I would argue that very few publishers have the appetite or interest outside of Riot Games, where there's a bigger entertainment strategy. Chris could probably speak more to this, or tell me got something different in my coffee this morning. I think there's very few publishers that actually have the appetite, focus, and capabilities to build out the kind of infrastructure that Martin was describing to really satisfy the digital and live experiences that gamers in this generation crave. And that's where I think it's exciting for companies like Vindex, like ESL, and others. And I think we could add a tremendous amount of value there. And it's all about how do you build the right relationship with that publisher or IP holder around that. Some game publishers don't even make their own games anymore, right? They work with third-party studios on it. So why do they want to suddenly start operating, scaling, and monetizing big esports titles and communities when they're hot? And how do you deal with that when games and flavors inevitably change? So I think there's a healthy role for the infrastructure, the picks and shovels, as Martin was describing, within this, and can add a lot of value that's complementary to that of making great games.
Yeah, I guess there are two sides to that coin in the context of trillion-dollar companies and consolidation in the space. Maybe I'll throw this question at Chris Greeley. Are the companies going to be too big for this to matter? Understanding and respecting Craig's excellent point that, yeah, if it does matter, it might make sense to have experts come in and run it for you. But does this reach a point where, yes, it's great that they've got the ability to withstand quarterly, pressure on reporting figures to be able to make investments in the space. But what's the bigger picture? Is this going to end up being something that gets sidelined, or is it something that's going to have now the resources and time to grow into what it needs to be?
I think it's like really a question of what you want esports to be as a rights holder and a publisher. There's the marketing bucket, and I think that there are some games that fall like pretty squarely into that. Like the folks at Activision Blizzard will talk about the World of Warcraft Mythic Dungeon Invitational being a marketing tool, right? Not, while it is an esport and competition, right? They are squarely focused on its ability to draw eyeballs to World of Warcraft and push subscriptions. Where on the flip
it all
side,
started out that way, right? It was all marketing. In the beginning.
well, I mean, you would talk to people who were running League of Legends competitions back in 2012, and we went from fan servicing. This is a thing our fans want, and we're fans first. To this is a sport, and we want to make it. We want to make it an independent business. And like that's the other. I think that's the other bucket you see, right? Is if we're not using it for marketing, then we're trying to run a business and run a sport. And even at Riot, I think we fluctuate between titles, like our AAA esport titles, Valorant and League of Legends. Really, we see those as independent sports that we think can generate a profit for us, generate a profit for teams, obviously create a really sustainable lifestyle for our pro players, and like help support an ecosystem. Whereas we look at games like Teamfight Tactics as really like organized competition, right? How do we service the community, understanding that we're never going to be able to monetize that in a way that's going to cover its costs. But when you so our strategies differ between those games, I think, and then you have to figure out what capacities you want to build and what capacities you want to outsource. And it doesn't really focus so much on dollar amount anymore. It's not that services have been commoditized. Like there are certainly like great and good and bad third-party providers. Luckily, we have some greats on the phone today, but it really comes down to, you can build an arena, like a really nice arena for your esport. But if you take the LCS, for example, we play 2 or 3 days a week, depending on the week and where we are in the season. And we're only running for, I don't know, let's call it 30 weeks a year. That is an awful lot of dark time where you're not making any money on that building. And it is just sitting there as a lump. And you can apply that to a content team, to a broadcast team, to a league operations or competitive operations team. If you don't have scale on your side to be able to keep those folks busy for the entire year, and from a personnel perspective, give them work that they find challenging and give them a path to grow in their career and take on more responsibility, right? All the things we want for ourselves. It's really difficult to scale an esport internally. So even when you look at the difference between the way we operate League of Legends in North America, where we have a very big team, and we're doing all the broadcast ourselves, almost all the content ourselves, other than some bespoke agencies, all the competitive operations work, all of the sponsorship sales work, it's all internal. It is markedly different than the way we've decided to scale Valorant, which is, we've got a bare bones team in North America that is operating things, but really we're working with third-party partners, at least on the broadcast and production side. We're doing our own sales and stuff. But those are the things that, we've realized that if we are going to scale up an entire team to also run Valorant, there's a tremendous amount of additional cost to that, and not really a lot of benefit for our sport or our teams or our fans. So we run that split strategy where some things we run inside, some things we run outside, and like having large partners on the outside just gives us a lot of confidence when we hand them Valorant, that they're not going to take our brand, our product, and run it into the side of a mountain.
Interesting. Excellent. Let's talk about monetization. So we've referenced media, right? So esports media has to be one of the biggest frustration points in terms of its inability to drive value, and probably the biggest translation error for traditional sports investors coming into the esports space. And a lot of that is owing to the culture, and it lives on the live side. It lives, breathes, and eats on Twitch. And Craig mentioned Mixer. Microsoft put God knows how many millions into trying to make that work. Couldn't. There've been other efforts by Facebook Gaming and other Meta, and it's massive investments, and it's just the culture just keeps gravitating back to it. Does that change? When does that change? How does that change? Or is that effectively an inherent limitation in that does not translate from traditional sports in the esports economy? I'm going to start with Rishi on the media question side.
Yeah. So, well, I think good news is we've already seen that YouTube and YouTube gaming have done, substantial investments in the space and have seen success. because they've already have such a distinct VOD platform, and their live offering is really great. So I think we're already seeing two players really surface at the top. Facebook gaming is starting to punch above its weight, especially in Southeast Asia. So I think what we'll see is, one, the trend is regional success for certain areas. So North America and Western Europe, you'll see a lot of success for Twitch and YouTube gaming. Southeast Asia, Facebook gaming. Latin America, potentially Facebook gaming. YouTube, it's a toss-up over there too. So there's just that component. I think the other thing too is that the next generation of esports fans, their attention span is getting smaller and smaller. And so you're going to start seeing short form content become much more impactful. So platforms like Twitter, which with highlights, and even TikTok, you're going to start seeing that boil up to the top. And I think that's also one area that's important is live rights are important. But I think if you look at the YouTube and Activision Blizzard deal, there was a lot of other things bundled with that. So there was live rights, there was distribution on Google Cloud Platform. There's so many other things happening that helped make it be a $180 million deal over 3 years. I think what's also worth noting now is like platforms like us are working with every league to try and actually monetize highlights and short form content. So finding new avenues for how you can monetize other forms of content is going to be really important. And it's going to become a substantial business. But I think one of the important things that needs to happen too is more non-endemic advertisers who are spending millions of dollars on the Super Bowl for an advertisement need to start taking those budgets and bringing it to esports. And so we're seeing that happen more. Chris's team has seen significant investment from a lot of the top brands out there. And so we want to see more of that happen across the entire ecosystem, because I think right now we're only monetizing an esports fan at a fraction of what we monetize a traditional sports fan.
Yeah. That's a fascinating insight, because I think that's, and you know this better than anybody, that's absolutely true for traditional sports as well, in terms of the exponentially increasing value of highlights versus live. And when you started your answer, I started thinking, okay, I think Rishi's got an interesting perspective that we're at the beginning of the maturation of media markets, as we traditionally define them, for esports. But what you're saying is our definition of media markets needs to change and broaden. On top of that, that's really interesting. Any other thoughts on the media side? Otherwise, I was gonna, and just full disclosure too. So Chris Hanna's being here has nothing to do with the Esports Observers Partnership. We didn't even put that as part of his title on our survey. It's actually because of his fascinating new role in the digital collectibles space. So in terms of talking about monetization, and on the back of my colleague at Foley, Andy Lee's great background on what's going on there generally, and also with respect to esports. Obviously, and again, something that extends to traditional sports, but natively digital, probably even a better opportunity for esports. Chris, walk us through NFTs and digital collectibles generally, and what the upside is for esports in particular.
Yeah, so I hope we have a couple of hours.
Yeah,
I'm gonna start.
I'll try to do a couple minutes.
No, I mean, okay, so I always want to detach the topic from esports per se and talk about gaming for a second. And if we go under in the underlying technology, right? And I'm gonna speak really basic. So please don't kill me, anyone. So what happens, right? What happens with like Bitcoin and NFTs and all the blockchain stuff is that you now have a opportunity to prove digital ownership, right? So there's digital assets, and you can validate, you can authenticate, and you can prove ownership. That's new. What that does is that puts a layer over digital items, and that puts a layer over the internet. So now you can make the internet ownable, right? But that's just one application. There's plenty of applications where blockchain does make sense, and I always take car mileage. Right, so everyone tries to rip you off. They manipulate. Imagine that every garage you go to would record, the mileage of your car. You can cut out any middleman. I'm going to buy a car. I see what the mileage is. It's decentralized on the blockchain. It's authenticated. You can't falsify it. I know exactly what the cars run. That's a cool application. Is a good application selling pictures of apes? I don't know. Maybe. It's like I use profile pictures and am part in project, but is that the best application of the technology? Maybe not. But then you have the community around it, and the joy or the benefits or the value that it gives to people. And it's the same thing then, why would you buy like a Rolex or like a fancy car, right? It's the same thing. It's just, it's status, it gives you joy, it kind of, puts you into a community, so you're part of a tribe again, basic human instincts. So what does it mean for gaming? Really interesting, because, and I gotta smile at Chris here for a second. Like, I play a lot of League of Legends, and I buy skins. But if Chris, for whatever reason, decides to ban my account or lock me out, that's it. My stuff's gone, and I spend a couple of $100 minimum on my things. So when you look at what could like NFTs, what could that mean? I could own things, and I could resell them at a certain point. So I would now decide I don't want to play League anymore, but I own my stuff and I can take it out of the game and I can put it on the marketplace and I can sell it. Do you need NFTs for that? Not necessarily. So that's another question that you always have to ask. Like, do you need NFT technology or do you need the blockchain for that? I mean, no, you don't, right? Like, Chris can tell you what skins I own. And it's also like I log into my account and they're there. So, that kind of works too. So we're talking about decentralization, right? It's about taking IP out of a controlled ecosystem into something else. And if you look at big publishers right now, like, what's their incentive? Like, hey, Chris, can I take all of your IP out and do whatever I want with it somewhere else? Probably not, right? It's not so interesting anymore. But then on the other hand, you see, like, take Counter-Strike. You see people buying Counter-Strike skins, and you see some people, from some regions spending like tens of thousands, if not, six-figure like money on a Counter-Strike skin, which they technically don't own. Right. So I think when we talk about ownership and when we talk about proof of ownership, that's where it can play a role. Do I believe that publishers like, Riot Games, you take like Activision Blizzard, use Ubisoft, are they going to really be the forefront of innovation? Probably not. Will they at some point have to join whatever is culture then? Maybe. Right. But then you look at, and that's the one thing I want to mention, because we touched upon this a couple of times. When you look at how NFTs are perceived by gamers, like, they seem to hate them, which to me is probably a lack of education. Like, I don't know, because there's a benefit to ownership, but Ubisoft, when they announced what they're doing, they had to pull a trailer because people just gave them, a lot of negative comments.
Why? That's very curious to me, because you mentioned the tribality, if that's a word, behind these things. There's nothing more tribal, and I come from a traditional sports background, from 10 years at the NBA and 4 years at IMG before all this really kind of merged. But I've never seen anything more tribal than esports and its culture. So between that and its digital nature, why that? What negative reaction? Is it because they see it as exploitative in the short term?
So I think it appears to be a lot of, and I'll let anyone else jump in here. I think it's a lot of perceived cash grab, and it kind of also goes back to the ICO bubble that we had in gaming and esports, where a lot of people had built their projects and they had their initial coin offerings, which got regulated, and then they disappeared. But yep. a lot of people got ripped off and lost a lot of money, and I think that still sticks with people.
Right. People still another big complaint is around just the ecological impact of NFTs and everything around that. So it's between that and people feeling like it's a cash grab and you're being sold snake oil. It's, I would say the gaming community is very skeptical, but the esports community is even more skeptical about anything after how many times we've been burned. So all those things come together.
That's interesting. So and as we all know, crypto has been a part of the esports culture economy for many, many years. Yet, is there any sort of gravitation away from that, or is that still just a necessary part of the culture? Cryptocurrency.
I think it all just takes time, right? I mean, it's everything takes longer, and I think there's an interesting technology, as Chris was describing, that's being applied to everything and anything, and that creates the bad actors and the skepticism that Rishi was describing. And ultimately, right, it's the success of it, in my opinion, is undoubtable, right? You can't see, Bobby, what's behind you, but that's some New York Yankees memorabilia behind you. And I'm guessing that there's probably more people watching that and appreciating whatever that bat might be today than there normally would be.
There
you go. But that's the idea, right? It's about scarcity, it's about trust, and it's about utility. And what's very much lacking today in the world of NFTs is the utility behind it. So that will come over time, but that just needs to be built out. But in my opinion, it's inevitable.
This is Andy. Can I hop in for a second? Because one of the things that Chris Hanna said that struck me, which I think was very interesting in terms of NFTs, you were talking about, before you transitioned into the esports, we're talking about NFTs generally, and the sense of community that is driving these projects, and the Discord, and people talking and sharing, and the user ownership. And it just made me think the other area, right? An area where many of us see that type of dynamic is it's a big part of the reason why a lot of us encourage our kids to play traditional sports, right? The camaraderie, the community, the team building, getting together. And I think what we're seeing with NFT projects, which I think over time will translate into this world and maybe start to overcome some of that skepticism, is here's a way for that. Obviously, it's not the same as in real life, but that dynamic and that goal that we're shooting for in traditional sports to maybe become more and more a part of the esports and the online gaming world.
If you look at scale for that, I think yes, that exists, and there is projects that have that, and that get together, and there's a couple of CC0, CCO, however you want to call this, project where people can build on top of other things, and all that stuff's happening, which is great. But let's not forget that 99% of the projects we have right now are complete nonsense. They're gonna leave like burned ground. People are gonna lose a lot of money. So I'm fully aligned with what Craig said. I believe that the underlying technology, the adoption is gonna happen if you like it or not. In a couple of years, you don't even think about it. Right now, we call it NFTs. We think about blockchain. But once you put an application layer forward that kind of hides that for you, right? But it's just everything is on the blockchain, but you don't know. You don't have to know, right? That's going to happen at some point. So you look at receipts and everything. It's event tickets, royalty tracking. There's so many benefits to the technology. It's just a matter right now. It's like everything has to be an NFT. Doesn't make sense at all. People buy into stuff, and a lot of these communities are just, it's nonsense because it's nobody even puts any effort into this, right? And this is why I think people are so have this skepticism towards the industry, which I share, because there's just so many people who feel like, oh, I can make money. It's great for media funding. So we see a lot of projects now when we talk about IP, and we talked about Riot Games, and we can't just take the IP out and do whatever we want. But if I'm creating a completely new IP, I can design it that way, and I can use it as a fundraising mechanism, right? So RumbleCon League, and you look at these things, they initially sell their NFTs, which are going to be a playable component later on. They present their roadmap, and then it's up to you to decide whether the team can execute on the roadmap and whether you believe it's going to work. But then they sell their NFTs for millions, so they can then build, and they don't necessarily rely on external investors early on, so then can retain more of their own IP and their rights, which is great, right? But even there, like most of the projects, probably going to go to hell.
I haven't found anything quite as polarizing in esports, at least on the sponsorship side, as we've seen crypto. So when we have a team called TSM, they signed a monster deal with FTX, the crypto exchange, and
where they changed the name of the team, right?
They did, except we have a prohibition in some of our leagues around having crypto exchanges as a name sponsor, specifically because we're broadcast into some jurisdictions where there are regulatory issues. So when TSM announced that they had done this deal and they were changing their name, but not in Riot Games, the number of really angry mentions in my Twitter feed and DMs I got were off the charts. And I've done some stuff publicly that the community has hated, and I have never seen more vitriol than this. Wow. 2 months later, we announced our own deal with FTX, and I got another round of it, this time from people telling me that I didn't care about the earth, that I was part of the problem, that there's a comment in there about GPU shortages and price surges being connected, and I got a bunch of that, because of assholes like you, I can't upgrade my GPU. There was a lot, and it's just we saw the same thing internally when we announced the deal to Riot and to our internal team before we announced it publicly, and it was a really bad day of like people you work with all the time and respect who were just like, hey man, you messed this up, like you've ruined it for everybody. And then the other half of the company that are like, hey, I love crypto, I think it's the future, and you guys are out doing God's work, like keep it up. And it's like, I haven't seen it anywhere else. We announced a Bud Light deal. No one came through telling us that we were trying to destroy minors and like get 15-year-olds to drink. But the crypto is just an incredibly polarizing topic for an awful lot of people.
It's fascinating to me that the vitriol was, I thought you were going to say that the vitriol was behind their changing the name, because TSM is one of it's like the Yankees, right? In a lot of ways of all the esports teams. And I thought that there'd be, vitriol about their changing the name and touching something sacred. But it's amazing to me how Gen Z and Gen Z Plus buys in so hard to sponsorship, right? They just see it as affection for the thing they love, as opposed to, Gen X, right? And Gen X above, which we always saw it as something almost dirty, right? It's amazing, like the difference in the cultures. But that's, to Rishi's point about the evolution of media, that is definitely, I think, a learning that it's still pretty fresh learning for traditional sports. But the younger generations, they love it. Like they love meaningful, authentic sponsorship. Like that to them is better than no sponsorship. So just a matter of time till there's a crypto sponsor on a Yankee uniform, is what we're saying. What about while we're on the topic of blockchain, which, by the way, I think we're just scratching the surface on for everything. I think it's going to massively shift the entire world, and especially starting on the legal side, with all the the archaic checks and balances, and the 87,000 pages to do a simple real estate transaction. I think are going to become a couple of clicks in the not too distant future, and someone who's going to be much wealthier than I'll ever be is going to figure that out. But blockchain gaming, like it's something, I think it's kind of a new buzzy thing, right? We're starting to read a lot about it in the context sometimes of NFTs. Rishi, Martin, want to jump in on that and give a little background and your thoughts on what that is and where that's going?
I'll definitely pass that ball to it.
Okay, sorry, Martin. I was just trying to give you some more shine. But Rishi, go ahead.
No, I think we should open it up to everyone, because I've got everything we've talked about so far really covers it. But I mean, going back to just, I think crypto in general, even just taking a step back to the previous conversation, I find it incredibly ironic that the gaming industry is so decisive on it. But, we've seen something as iconic as the Staples Center now change its name to the Crypto.com Arena. And people are making fun of that, but they're not like upset about it, right? And it's just, it's a fascinating thing. But I do think a lot of these exchanges and all of the things they're doing are really driving money. Back to my original point earlier about we need more money coming into the space and investments, and these types of investments are really important for that to happen. And so I hope we see more of this happen. I hope we see it become more widely accepted as well.
Right. So I neglected to mention up top that if there are any questions from the audience, that you could throw them in the chat, and I think there's going to be some curation. To the extent we don't have any Q&A, that's fine too. We'll just keep running with it. But I do want to turn this over to Martin, and I'm just going to be blunt and just ask you about Belong, right? Because that's really what I wanted to get to. So I guess the indirect way about it is we talked earlier about the grassroots and monetizing the grassroots. And I mean, hell, the entire culture of esports started in LAN centers in, depending on your version of history, but, something, somewhere in South Asia, post 2008 financial crisis, right? I think there's probably a deeper history there in terms of it in Korea and broadcast television. But that's kind of where it all began, and no one's really kind of brought it back full circle. And I think what you guys are doing is really fascinating on a genuine level. I'm also, full disclosure, good friends with the Vindex CEO, Mike Sepso, is lot of people know. But I would love to hear from you, Martin. I think, and I would love to hear the panel's reaction to your strategy, your execution. What are you guys up to in terms of building up these Belong centers? I know you've launched a bunch of them in the U.S., a lot of them outside of big cities. What's the thought there, and how do we connect that to the culture we've been talking about? And I'll let you go first. It's a digital first culture, so it's really interesting to think about organizing it from the grassroots up on a physical level.
Yeah, so look, I think from a from a Vindex perspective, we are fueling engagement, if you like, across the whole gaming ecosystem. That's what we do, and that's why.
Oh, Martin, I think you muted yourself by accident. There you go.
I think I did that with my hands, which was quite an achievement.
Impressive.
So I think from a Vindex perspective and why Belong sits within that, we're extending, if you like, lifetime value. We're extending the lifetime of gaming participation, of engagement, and really trying to fuel that competitive programming and community that we need as esports. But bluntly, someone has got to succeed in this, because without solving for grassroots, we're sort of missing everything, the platform on which people need to stand. So we're connecting communities. We believe, very differentiated from in approach to how this has been looked at before. We've obviously got our arenas in the UK, and they've taught us an awful lot, and taught us a lot, and being handheld with publishers, Riot being one of the key component parts of why we were successful in the UK, because it was difficult to set up what we've set up. So it really is a platform for amateur esports, for want of terminology. And we think we've got this significant opportunity now to create the amateur esports ecosystem. Everybody uses the same analogy, which is the baseball diamonds. You've got Major League Baseball, you've got thousands of minor and recreational leagues, and then you've got playing catch in the backyard. And there's lots of elements that don't exist on that from an esport perspective. And I think it's been difficult. It's been difficult to provide a significant level of focus. We've talked about sponsors, we've talked about publishers, we've talked about game developers. We've spoken actually about NFT. We've spoken about NFTs as well, which history tells us that gamers are really expect an awful lot for the experiences that they're getting, and they're very differentiated. If I play Street Fighter, I'm not the same person, and I'm not expecting the same experience as if I'm playing League of Legends. And you have to be able to accommodate all of those different communities. And what we're now doing is we're now joining the dots. And that is where we're doing the operationally difficult, which is our first 5 arenas weren't all in the same state. So Houston, Dallas, Columbus, Chicago and Nashville, that's not the easiest 5 to go with initially, but it really is about driving those local communities to be able to play against each other. So this is where we've created an identity for the local communities. So next weekend, you'll see Schomburg Foxes playing Pearland Archers. And this will be really the spawning of what we did in the UK that we didn't realise was sort of the magic sauce, which is a physical location playing a physical location, giving real identity to those communities, but living by the word and our brand, which is Belong, which is however you want to participate and whatever level you want to participate at, we will aid and support. We will aid and support that. Just picking up on something Chris said earlier on the dark times, because we have to solve for those dark times, because we are not exactly, but 24/7 gaming arenas. And some of that's difficult, because Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon is not as easy as Saturday at midday. But it really is about the programmatics. It's about our collegiate. It is about our training programs, working with the likes of Epic on Train the Trainer for Fortnite. It's about how we get the pro esport teams in to give them a platform as well, as we have with Dallas Envy. So you're creating from, you know, real casual players right up to those that want to do path to pro. And everybody talks about path to pro because it's really sexy. But the other end is the millions and millions of people that just want to participate at a level that they're comfortable with. So I think that the interconnectivity of our arenas plus our approach to everyone welcome is probably where we think we've focused our efforts a little bit differently to how this has been done before.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Sorry, Bobby.
Yeah,
one
sure,
last
please,
thing
please, yeah.
is operationally, you have to be able to run multiple different arenas in multiple different states. There's really boring but really important operationals you have to get right. You have to open at the right time. You have to make sure that your till's balanced. You need to make sure your supply chain's right for F&B and for PlayStations, etc. So you have to create that to be able to put these on in the pace that we're putting them on. And I think historically people are opening arenas and getting to a point where it's really difficult. We created the architecture before we put the arenas into the digital platform in which we've created.
That makes sense. I'm sure from a publisher's perspective, it's a service, right? Because it's focusing on a part of the economy, much less the gaming verse, I suppose, that they just don't have the ability to touch on a day-to-day. So that'll be interesting to see how that all comes together.
Can I ask Martin? Yeah. Can I ask Martin one question?
Sure.
Because here's my general thing with venues, right? And I mean, you touched on a couple of things already, but so it's almost like this trend where now everyone is creating like physical venues and, kind of getting back the old LAN days and people want to play together. And I totally get that. I have a venue really close to my home. And I get it's COVID, but I rarely go or never go. And now you have all of these venues, right? Because they're in a fixed place. There's only a certain radius of people you most likely attract, right? And then it's what you said, it's almost like 24/7, right? So you need to program them every day. Like, how are you going to make the economics work? Like, how do you, and specifically on that scale, because the capital requirements must be immense. And then how do you make that work? Because I don't think that the same person would come in 7 days a week, right?
Yeah, it's the segmentation, Chris. Really, it's in the UK we segment it to 5, and it's really from being able to run parties. So, mum and dad putting on a party for their child, dad or mum wanting to play with child. We've also got at the other end of the spectrum, the competitive and community. And if you put all of those segments together and program for those different segments, that's where you drive the big enough revenue number that satiates for your cost. But if you do it by segment and you put the economics behind the segments, it works. What I think you've seen in a lot of lands, or we've seen, in the UK and here in a lot of lands, is maybe one segment or 2 segments. If you've got enough breadth on the programming that you're offering, you can get that into a turnkey solution that works for all the arenas in the same way. It's a very good question. It's obviously the undoubted question, but we've got the luxury of the UK arenas that we've been running since 2016 that have really given us the insight of what we've needed to put here in the US.
Thank you.
Great. So we're at I'm not really sure what the parameters are other than respecting the schedule and people's time, but we're at 2:30. We're at the endpoint that we had scheduled. So I'm just going to ask one last question to kind of tie it all together, and then we can go around the horn, and each of you can either address it or just give some closing thoughts. But when most people think about esports, and we address this up top, we think about the esports teams. And obviously, there are massive implications with the franchise model, with what's happening with Activision Blizzard. Chris really does that on a day-to-day in terms of managing those leagues and teams. I think that there are bigger teams behind the franchise teams within League of Legends, LCS, and whatnot. What we have seen are a lot of teams struggling, right? As the business models have tried to sort themselves. Despite this massive audience, we've seen some teams figure it out better than others. I can tell you firsthand, even publications like Forbes that have influence in terms of creating that perception of what the value is struggles with this too, right? So Where are we with that? Like, are we starting to see where everything is going to evolve towards? We see some mix between a content company, a competitive gaming company, a merchandise lifestyle company. Are those the buckets, right? Where you could throw NFTs into the merch side, and in streaming and entertainment and that sort of thing into the media's content side. Is that what this is? Does something shift fundamentally in terms of the sponsorship or media economics, or the revenue streams that we're not thinking of or haven't talked about today? Gambling, for instance. What are your thoughts on where the franchise model goes for the future of esports, which really, at the end of the day, even in a tournament model, it's still got teams entering them, right? So what's the future of the esports team business model? I'm going to go around the horn, start with Chris Greeley up top.
Everything's fine, and I don't know what you're talking about. I think teams will continue to innovate and look for, they're not all running the same business. And it was the really interesting thing when we got into franchising was that all of our teams that we're trying to align on the growth and glorification of the LCS will leave a room and then go have a fight about their CSGO teams in Europe. And they're playing on a different battlefield than we are, right? We're a microcosm of their world rather than it being the other way around. And I think teams are going to continue to develop business models that synergize with the other things they want to do. So teams like Cloud9 and Team Liquid are going to continue to run, run teams in 16 different games and create diverse sponsorship portfolios. And look to run themselves as a conventional sports teams. Teams like 100 Thieves or Optic are going to continue to run on like an influencer model or a merch model and push that. And I think we're going to see some models are going to be proved to be objectively bad or are going to be written off as like, hey, we're just here for the value appreciation. The day-to-day cash flow doesn't make a difference. I think the thing that's really hurting teams at this point is that there's no cost control because there's no salary caps in any of our games, in any league, including the Overwatch League, which used to have one until the Department of Justice decided to take a look at it, and then that went away too. And because the top end of teams are all in an arms race to be the most competitive. And they're often competing against across the world. So a team in NA is not necessarily arming up to beat another team in NA. They're looking across to beat a team from Korea or China or some other country. The economics, while those cost controls aren't in place, are always going to be a little bit imbalanced. And it just becomes a question of whether revenues, especially direct-to-consumer revenues, things like NFTs or gambling revenue or whatever other revenue streams come out, can grow faster than the expenses, which put teams in a materially different place if they're running the right business model in the future.
Right. Great answer. I always say they're all very different businesses. It's like comparing apples and oranges and pears when you look at esports teams. I guess my question is, and I think you've answered it, that it will be apples, oranges, and pears. Is that the case, or is this all evolving towards the right model that'll be somewhat universal, or is it all contextual depending on region and brand? Chris Hanna?
I think it's going to be individual. And I would sign everything Chris said. And the way I look at this, just slightly different angle. I always look at teams as media companies, and not because they're kind of content driven, but mainly because they serve their community, right? And to me, esports and gaming is culture. It's code of identification for people. It's more than just playing video games, right? It's just grown up with culture. It's like, I don't have kids yet. If I will have kids, my kids will grow up in a world where gaming has never been that normal. Compared to when I grew up, like people looked at me like, oh, he's playing Counter-Strike, instead of studying. That is going to change, right? But that's a cultural shift. So it's for teams, the business is going to be different. But in the end, if you look at the common thread here, like everyone is kind of doing things left and right to monetize their community and the culture of gaming, right? And they all do it in different ways.
Yeah, I like the media company analogy, but some are less media companies than others too. So
Yeah, some of them are really badly branded. There's some
yeah,
of them you don't even know what they stand for, and I think they should not exist.
right. Maybe they won't. Craig?
I don't think they will.
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, you kind of hit two different things on here, and it's sort of been, a lot of it's talked about, but it's the idea of, I think one of the challenges right now is that there's a mixed identity or an unproven model of what it's going to be. And that's the idea across teams. And then, sorry to pick on you, Bobby, right? Then you added the idea of franchise-based teams, which is really when teams are coming together as business partners to create a business together. And I think that's where there's so much misalignment, let's say, in these franchises that have come into it, of all coming in for different reasons, all looking at a business opportunity, saying, I want to get what I want to get out of that. So I think in the world of franchise model, there's a lot of turmoil ahead as you figure out what is going to be the dominant business model and how do you orient value add partners against that. And that will happen in one of the ways that Chris has described. But I think ultimately, right, it's about having discipline within there. It's ultimately about accountability. It's going to be the iteration of it. And ultimately, it's about monetization. And that's been a little bit of the recurring theme here. We've got a massive audience, and we're trying to figure out how to extract more value from what we do through consolidation, through NFTs, through new innovation. But it's going to happen because, as Chris described, there's a generational shift that's happened across entertainment, and we're just at the bleeding edge of it.
So you're saying that potentially the right model involves no franchises.
It might, or
right. Okay.
I mean, right. The Yankees, right, of I don't know, sell out every game, and they're coming. They come to Major League Baseball every year wanting gate revenue, and I don't know, the Tampa Bay Rays can't fill an arena with people there, and they're thinking about it from a revenue share perspective, from having the scarcity of an asset. So the same exists all over. It's just coming at it from 100 different points, getting pushed and pulled without really understanding what is media rights, what are ticket sales, what is sponsorship, what is parking concession, what does it mean to own my real estate, to build the next LA Live. And maybe when that is better understood, perhaps there's more alignment around incentives for then a franchise value to orient those business partners in the same way. But I think right now there's that identity crisis. So an open model, I'm not saying right or wrong, I think is allowing for more of an opt-in basis from different individuals without perhaps the high price tag that some of these have drawn to start.
Makes sense. Martin, thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it will be, well, so we know that it's differentiated by team. If we look from a esport engine perspective, then what we're partnering in with one team is slightly different to another, and from a belong perspective, it's fascinating. Actually, it's fascinating how differentiated it is. But I think what we want to be doing from a belong perspective is sort of take the great out of each one of those to make the whole that bit bigger. So I think there's great initiatives with each of the professional esport teams that, they can all learn from each other. And I think belong in what it's doing, in how we're partnering, we're going to find what works, and we're also going to find what doesn't work. And I think we can take those learnings from Chicago to the West Coast to the East Coast to really aid and support on some of those engagement and monetization metrics. But to go into Chris and Chris's point, it's so differentiated, and I can't see that changing in the short term.
Right. And Rishi, with the closing word.
Good news is it's all growing. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from everything is it's continuing to grow. There's a serious commitment to investment across the board. And I think that, we're going to continue to see it grow, whether it's the conversation, whether it's the dollars coming in, all of those things are going up. And I think it's only going to keep going up. So it'll be a different model for everyone. It's not a one size fits all approach by any means, but I think everyone needs to find the way that it works best for them and build on that and continue to iterate from that.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time at the 2:41 mark, but thank you, Chris Freely, Chris Hanna, Craig Levine, Martin Gibbs, and Rishi Chadha for your time and insights, and to Foley and Lardner for hosting this great platform. And I'm not sure if I'm to turn this over to anyone here at the end to close. John, back to you for closing words.
I wasn't prepared for closing words other than to say thanks, guys. It was a really interesting discussion. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it, and we'll hopefully see you all soon at the next program.
Great.
And good luck out there.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for taking so much time of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.